Hi, I'm Kieren.
And I'm Riku.
Welcome to Artificially Ever After. For today's episode,
how AI unlocks the secrets of life.
Okay, welcome back everyone.
Thanks for tuning in.
Got a very special episode today, haven't we?
Yeah, so Kieren, what are we talking about and why?
So we are talking about something that is very closely aligned to my actual PhD research, which is why I'm excited to do this. I can't believe it's taken us 21 episodes to get to this point, but we're going to be talking about all things to do with AI and biology. And we're not just doing this because it's what I enjoy and what I do my research in. It's actually a very important time in this area of research because things are getting developed very quickly. There's lots going on in this kind of intersection between AI and biology. And we're seeing incredible research come out, which may mean that somewhere in the near future, we might be entering this realm of what was once science fiction and be able to do these incredible things like kind of choosing your child's traits from a menu, turning your leftovers into fuel for your car, or creating plastic water bottles that just when you throw them on the floor, they biodegrade. All these things which are starting to possibly shift over from this realm of science fiction, and we may find a path to making them happen. And this is all happening because we're seeing this integration of AI and biology move us in this direction where some point in the future we may be able to reprogram genetic code, DNA, the code of life, in a similar way and possibly as easily and cheaply as we can edit computer code and write software and all these things.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you saying I'm just a load of code, just lines of code? Or?
Yeah, maybe, and there may be a bug in there somewhere as well.
Oh, come on.
Which we might be able to fix, hopefully. That's the goal. But
look forward to that.
I mean, those examples there were these kind of moonshot ideas as to what the field is working towards. But today we are going to kind of look at the reality of the research that's going on and why this might enable us to go in that direction. And importantly, how we actually got here.
And just for a bit of intuition, why these two fields coming together makes so much sense. Just think of the absolute scale and structure of biological data. And it's just too big for a human to comprehend.
Yeah.
And just for some concrete numbers here, within a single human genome, there are 3 billion bases, which are basically the building blocks of DNA.
That's billion with a B. Wow.
With a B, yeah. But then a human has 30 trillion cells.
Containing those genomes,
with all those genomes. So it's just way too big.
It's a lot of data, yeah.
Yeah, and it actually turns out if you unraveled all the DNA in your body and laid it out end to end, it will go from the sun to Pluto and back 17 times.
17 times, wow.
Yeah, so it's a big data set.
Not that I can comprehend that distance either, but it sounds like a very, very long way. But that's within the human body. That's crazy. And
the crazy thing is and we'll find out in this episode, that AI is actually able to navigate this scale of data.
Yeah, but this is a really big field of research and there's lots going on. Maybe that's why we struggled to kind of narrow it down to do an episode in this to start with, because there's all sorts going on within this very broad intersection of AI and biology. But we've been very lucky to actually collaborate with an institution called AIBIO-UK to make a mini-series of these episodes. We've got 6 episodes coming up where we're going to cover all these things. But AIBIO-UK is a government-funded institution which is aimed at community building within this intersection of AI and the biosciences and to try and bring researchers and people together to collaborate and develop this area of research. So yeah, we've been very lucky to work with them. And we've got a few episodes coming up, haven't we, Ricky? You're going to talk us through what we're going to be covering?
Yes, so we've got 6 episodes with AIBIO-UK, and this one being kind of the birth of AI in biology. So we'll talk about what we can actually expect from this intersection of AI and biology, but also crucially how we got there and what is to come. On the second episode, we'll talk about how AI is decoding your genes. So we're starting from the smallest building blocks of humans, and this is actually what Kieran's PhD is based on, right?
Yeah, I'll have to go into it a bit in this, try not to get too technical, but yeah, this is where I do my research, is kind of down at the genome level, so that'll be super interesting.
And for our third episode, we'll talk about this AI tool called AlphaFold, which is able to understand and predict protein structures, and people say it's the biggest breakthrough in AI.
Yeah, because proteins are kind of the fundamental building blocks of all things living, right? So if you can crack those, you've got everything really. So yeah, we'll go into that more in episode 3 though.
And for our fourth episode, we'll talk about your AI pharmacist. And we're actually going to talk about things that might go into your own body here. So using AI to predict new medicines that are able to cure all kinds of diseases.
I guess that's then the application of some of these other kind of tools that help us understand the biology. The goal there is then to leverage that information to design new therapeutics and treatments. So that would be super cool. That's not in my area of research, but it's one that I'm super interested in. So
yeah, groovy. And then for our fifth episode, we're actually going to step outside the human body and ask, how can AI help save our planet?
Wow, yeah. So looking at other living organisms and ecosystems as well. So can we help preserve different habitats and help with climate change as well?
Wow. Yeah, and then for our sixth episode, our final one, we'll be wrapping up and thinking how we can go forward safely. I mean, importantly, we'll find in all of these episodes when we touch on the ethical issues that there are a lot. The stakes are high, and it's a very serious piece of technology going forwards.
Yeah.
So it will be a very serious episode, but we'll make sure in the second half that we'll keep it positive, and we'll actually end with what the experts are saying as the most safe way going forward. So thankfully,
we
they've
look forward to
put
that.
some thought into that.
Cool. So shall we get into the first episode?
Let's do it. Okay, so Kieren, could you give us a bit of a rundown? Why AI Bio, and what are the big scale impacts to me and the audience?
Yes. So we're going to set the scene a bit with the kind of scope and the potential really of this technology. So some of these things are being researched and worked on, but they very much are something in the near term that will be unlocked by AI and biology. The first of which is in healthcare and specifically drug design. So we've seen that AI, as we've discussed lots of time on here, is a tool which can digest and analyze lots and lots of data and find patterns in there. And one thing that we do in drug design is analyze a lot of patient data and understand patterns in when you kind of give people different drug combinations at different time frames and timelines, what their symptoms are before and after. So there's enormous amounts of data here, and AI is the perfect tool for kind of analyzing that. So I think one of the first examples where we really saw AI speed up that process was actually in the COVID-19 pandemic. So Pfizer, the big pharmaceutical company, they used AI and machine learning to analyze a lot of their clinical trial data, which normally takes a lot of time. And it took the analysis time of all that data down from a month to just 22 hours, so less than a day, by assisting these researchers and the people analyzing this data. Importantly, it didn't replace them. It wasn't as if we just kind of discovered those insights and took them as fact from the AI, but it just helped us uncover those insights in far less time. And that was part of the steps which helped to speed up the development of the COVID-19 vaccine.
Right, wow.
But more recently, and probably more interestingly actually, we've started to see AI applied much earlier on in the drug development pipeline. So before just analysing the outcomes in the data when we're actually testing the drugs, we're now seeing AI that is able to generate new possible drugs and test kind of different combinations beforehand. So in the very early stages as a kind of screening process. So before we actually go to any trials, before we even go to the lab to start testing lots of different options of different drugs and their combinations, AI has been an incredible tool for, on the computer, trying out those drugs before we even go to the lab, and therefore saving a bunch of time and money and resources.
So let me get this straight. So is this where you give an AI lots of past data and experiments, and then the AI kind of learns to predict how the experiment would go if you actually did it in real life?
Correct, yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay.
So it's learning from previous kind of drug combinations and side effects and outcomes as well to understand, which aspects of the drug or their combinations, the patterns that match with the outcomes that we've seen over, historically, sorry. And
because the AI can kind of predict these outcomes much faster than the actual experiment would take in the real world, it saves loads of time. Is that the idea? Or?
Exactly, yeah. Because otherwise, if you wanted to, say you had a load of historical data on drug A and a load of historical data on drug B, without having to go to the lab and then into human trials, for example, on the painstaking combination of trying out different amounts of combinations of drug A and B, we could test all those combinations using machine learning models. Very oversimplified example there, but that's the gist.
Wow, that makes sense.
And there's a company called Accenture who are very focused on putting AI machine learning first in their drug development pipeline and very much focusing on developing those methods to speed up the drug development process, hopefully in a very safe way still. But they, in 2020, for the very first time, went to phase 1 clinical trials for an immuno-oncology drug. So a specific cancer treatment where you use your body's own immune system or help your body's own immune system to fight the cancer, where that drug was largely designed and predicted using AI. And that took their exploratory research phase down from 4.5 years to 12 months.
Oh, wow.
So it was literally, less than a quarter of the time to identify that drug that then went on to be successful.
Wow, that is really impressive.
So that kind of gives a bit of an overview and some examples as to how AI can help us understand how human biology reacts to different drugs and how they can be used to treat ailments and cancers within our biology and bodies.
Wow, so that really is kind of unlocking some secrets to life, at least. So.
Yeah, or at least speeding them up. So that's kind of where currently those are examples where we're doing things that we maybe previously could have done but faster. But I guess the real kind of novel application of AI where it's uncovering brand new stuff are some recent examples where they can tackle superbugs, so antibiotic resistant bacteria. So these are very stubborn types of bacteria cells which have over time become resistant to antibiotic treatment and therefore are very hard to get out of our bodies. And in May 2023, scientists used AI to discover a brand new class of antibiotics that they could kill these deadly species with that were antibiotic resistant. Oh, wow. And those were generated from scratch by the AI. And I remember reading that there were kind of scientists that went on record saying that it did so and kind of found these cures in a way that were very novel and probably in a way that biologists wouldn't have conventionally thought of doing.
Wow, that's really cool, but also kind of scary, the fact that it found these solutions and drugs that no human really would have thought of on their own.
Yeah.
Because we don't. How do we know if those drugs actually work? You know what I mean? Like the AI is predicting these things, and we don't know if it's always right. So I don't know. I feel like there's some ethical issues here that maybe we should touch on.
It's a really good point, and I think we'll come on to some of these later in the second half of the episode for sure. But luckily, in these instances, we're seeing AI be used in a context where there are already very, very rigorous ethical and safety frameworks, drug design. Yeah. There's a lot of checkpoints that are made before we would ever go to clinical trials, and then even after that with kind of rolling them out to a population. So, yeah, we'll obviously talk about instances where that's not quite the same, but the good thing about the application of AI in biology is that when the stakes are high, there are already very rigorous frameworks in place. But you do touch on a very important point that now when we introduce AI and machine learning that is generating new possibilities, there are additional checkpoints and kind of checks and balances we'll need to put in place to make sure that we're still super safe. But just to quickly touch on the last couple kind of areas in which it's really unlocking insights into biology, we're seeing enormous breakthroughs in the environmental sector and everyday kind of sustainability. So some amazing examples are, just like we spoke about AI uncovering new antibiotics, people have also used AI in a similar way to generate new plastic-eating enzymes.
Oh, wow.
So these researchers use machine learning to generate these kind of novel adaptations and mutations to existing and natural enzymes, which we see that have occurred in nature. And it basically allows the bacteria to degrade certain plastics. And these adaptations that the machine learning model predicted is basically like speeding up evolution. So it's as if the machine learning can go off on the computer and predict what would happen if we do all these mutations kind of millions of years in advance, and we pick the one in the kind of theoretical future which will be really, really good and advanced at consuming as much plastic as fast as possible.
Wow, so is that like learning the process of evolution?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And it's done that to figure out the best adaptations to these enzymes to, get rid of as much plastic that's in the environment as possible.
Wow. So I guess this is one of those cases where like we say that AI is really bad for the environment because we think about the compute costs of these like large language models. But I guess there are also some really cool applications of AI that actually like save the planet, maybe. So
yeah, this is one good example, and another one more kind of generally in sustainability is using AI to produce different biomaterials, and this is what is now very closely linked to what my research is in. So using machine learning to help us predict how to design and genetically engineer life to get the living organisms, so whether that's kind of bacteria cells or enzymes or all these different compounds which occur naturally and these reactions which occur in nature, can we hack and utilize those living systems and that biology to produce these biomaterials sustainably? So a lot of these applications, which I think we mentioned in a previous episode, so we have things like getting bacteria cells to produce biofuels and biopolymers, so making plastics sustainably and fueling our cars without having to frack for fossil fuels. So producing all the stuff that we already have, but using living organisms and nature to produce those for us in a sustainable way. So like you were saying in the intro with kind of using your leftovers to fuel your car.
Yeah, I like the word you said, hack. So you're kind of leaning into the idea that we can learn the code to life and just
it's very much feels like it's playing God, doesn't it? Let's hope we use it for the right applications. Maybe that will get us into the kind of ethical questions.
That's a second half topic, I believe.
And the last of which, a little plug to myself here, is what I am involved in my part-time outside of my research, co-founding a startup called Neofossil, where we utilize synthetic biology and engineer living systems to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So carbon capture, try and clear up all of our greenhouse gas emissions and lock them away into useful biomaterials, which we can use to sustainably do things that we already do.
Wow. Is that why you stopped recycling? Because you just kind of like offset your carbon emissions?
Yeah, you're not going to share that, but maybe.
No, I'm just kidding, by the way.
Cool. So that's the kind of full landscape of all the different areas of biology in which AI is unlocking these amazing new insights and hopefully turning things that were previously science fiction into reality. And hopefully, if we use all the kind of tools correctly, helping to save the planet, to improve our health and unlock all these things which will enrich our day-to-day lives and hopefully the lives of other species and the planet as well.
Wow, so that's actually quite a lot. So should we just have a quick recap on how did we get to this very exciting position?
Let's look back at the history, because these were two kind of separate fields of research that very much had different buildings in universities. These people probably wouldn't interact historically, but all of a sudden, at a point in time, we started to see these people start to kind of discuss, have conversations in corridors maybe, and now we're seeing whole kind of research groups, such as the one that I'm very lucky to be in, where we have these interdisciplinary researchers coming from computer science and coming from biology and really kind of building these tools from scratch.
So I've kind of split the timeline into 4 key stages. So one of them is before computers. So this is back in the day. Yeah, we're talking pencil and paper.
Wow.
I mean, I still love pencil and paper. So in this phase, we see that biological processes such as like population dynamics are actually really well modeled by mathematical equations.
Okay, so is this kind of referring to how living things divide and grow in number, I guess?
Yeah, exactly. And a really nice example that I use is with rabbit and fox populations. So imagine you have a field and it's got loads of rabbits and foxes in it, and you'd like to know kind of how many rabbits there are or how many foxes there are at any given time.
Yeah.
You can think intuitively that if there are too many foxes and not enough rabbits, there's not enough food for the foxes, so they start to die.
Okay.
But as the foxes start to die, that means that not many foxes are eating the rabbits.
Yes.
So the rabbits start to go up.
Got you.
But then if there's too many rabbits, then there's not enough grass or the resources they need to survive, or also there's just so many of them for the foxes to eat.
Right.
So you have this like circular dynamic. But the point here is that these interesting dynamics in biology can actually be explained by mathematical equations.
Okay.
So that's what we see in this like pre-computers phase of kind of using mathsy ideas in biology.
In biology, so this is like the very first application of it.
Yes, exactly. And this is kind of before the computer, so not even AI yet.
Yeah, so nowhere near as complex as understanding genetics or any of the kind of small scale stuff, is it? It's just looking very high level at like population numbers.
Yeah, because you could imagine like you can just watch a field and do this yourself at home even. So
yeah, cool.
No need for a computer, yeah. But why did we start using computers then for biology? Well, once computers arrived, there's this initiative called the GenBank database, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
And this is when we start seeing these big data sets with biology. So as we mentioned earlier, like just how useful this like genetic information can be.
Yeah.
if someone's already kind of done this really long experiment on some gene sequence, it would be a bit of a waste of time to kind of just repeat that. So someone thought of this GenBank idea, which is this big library of kind of these experiments, the results of this genetic information.
Yeah.
And obviously these sequences, trillions of letters long, won't fit on a piece of paper, so it makes sense to store them digitally in a computer. Yeah.
And this next phase was largely kicked off by the development of these high throughput robotics and measurement techniques in the laboratory. So this was a big reason why we started to generate all of this data on a very, very large scale, is because previously these painstakingly long experiments that scientists in the lab had to do with a pipette, where they'd be going from kind of one test tube to another, spending hours and hours and hours on kind of combining different chemicals, taking measurements. Robotics came in, and almost like a manufacturing line, it automated a lot of that painstakingly long process and sped it up, so you could do tens and often hundreds of experiments of the same type at the same time. And as a result, because it was doing all of this kind of combining of chemicals and measurements, pipetting, all automated, it could run through the night, you'd go home at the end of your day and the robot would still be doing it. As a result, we'd generate kind of tons more data than we could ever do with a human just doing those measurements. And that is the large reason as to why we had this explosion of data, which could go on these databases like GenBank. And we had these very large sequences of living organisms' genomes, so we could understand and look at their DNA and their genetic code.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that sounds like GenBank's basically just like the Google for genetic information.
Yeah, basically like this enormous database that then scientists were able to start using and reading all this information and doing experiments using it.
Yeah.
And that's why I've had this explosion of innovation and insights and all this stuff that has come ever since.
Wow, it makes sense. So, I mean, I guess in a way, speaking of Google, we can move on to the machine learning era of kind of its intersection with biology. And the reason I say speaking of Google is because Google DeepMind were the ones that released AlphaFold that Kieren mentioned earlier. Yeah. And this is kind of that revolutionary application of AI in biology. So,
and sorry to interrupt you there, but just to kind of give a bit of context. So leading up to AlphaFold, there were lots of research groups that started to utilize all this data with machine learning, because as you said earlier, it's the natural way for kind of understanding and finding patterns in that enormous amount of data. So we started to see research groups doing these kind of applications, but none of them were truly groundbreaking. But then we got to AlphaFold, which is the one that caught everyone's attention.
Yeah, so one bit of background information for AlphaFold is that proteins are kind of life's building blocks. I think you mentioned this earlier, and the cool thing about proteins is it's not just kind of like what they're made of, but it's also how they kind of are structured together. So think of the shape of like almost like a big cotton wool. But sometimes they make like pretty patterns.
And I guess the intuition with them having different shapes and different functions is like a kind of key in a lock that with kind of enzymes specifically is a great example, that certain proteins, they only fit into certain binding sites because of their 3D structure and their shape. So
the shape's important, but it's also like, to a human, it just looks like a big cotton wool. It's crazy. Like, I don't know what kind of lock that will go in.
Just a ball of random stuff,
But as a bit of a common theme with AI is stuff that's really difficult for humans to process, just due to its sheer size or just the resolution of it, actually are really good for AI to look at and solve. So basically, AlphaFold, made by Google DeepMind, was this amazing kind of revolution where they could take a sequence, kind of just like, what is a cotton wool made of? Just what is it? And it can turn it into how does it look like?
Yes.
And being able to do that actually got some cool facts here. So they managed to fold over 200 million kind of protein structures.
Wow, yeah.
And just to put this into perspective, normally only one folding solution would be done in a single PhD.
Wow, yeah, it takes a long time, doesn't it?
So that actually equates to like billions of PhD hours saved just by this one piece of technology. So we're going to do a whole episode basically on AlphaFold because it was such a big and also really interesting application of AI in biology that actually will impact all of our lives. So
and a lot of insights into AI and machine learning, right, as well, and kind of some of the tricks they did with the data and the neural networks was super smart, and we've seen similar approaches being applied today in all different areas of machine learning. So it was a revolution,
Yeah, and moving on to where we're at today, which is this kind of generative AI era, and tying this back to AlphaFold is basically AlphaFold's this prediction model, right?
Yep.
So it kind of takes, what is this cotton wool, and then it turns into what does it look like, right? And now we're seeing generative AI such as ChatGPT, where it can create kind of these new things. And in the case of this AlphaFold example, I think it kind of builds a nice intuition of why generative AI is so powerful, is that it kind of creates a new material. So it's like, oh, here's a new type of cotton wool, like this is what it's made of. You can just plug that straight into your AlphaFold, which will then figure out whether it's feasible, what are the properties. And because you have these two things, something that generates and then this prediction model, it basically means that you can just massively upscale that level of kind of exploring different gene structures.
Wow, and the speed, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just one example, but we can imagine that generative AI is basically doing an analogy of that with many, many different fields. So, for drug discovery, not just genes, for those
new enzymes that eat plastic.
New enzymes, those foods that are grown in labs. So
this really is in the realm of playing God now, isn't it? You're just kind of generating new life and new living organisms to do what you want them to do. So, really crazy, hard to kind of comprehend that this is where we're at now, but this, I guess, is why we wanted to convey the scale, that this is almost like the kind of ultimate application of AI when it meets the living real world, and we can manipulate biology, which, everything comes from biology, doesn't it? I sometimes see those videos online where it's like someone's just filming like the countryside and just a kind of grassy meadow, and it's like, how did we make the internet from this? And it's like, everything came from biology, right? So biology really is the ultimate tool to unlock, and you can make anything and everything from biology. So that is the scope that we're looking at here.
And I mean, we only just touched the surface here. So please obviously stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, and check out AIBIO-UK and online resources on this. So
cool. So should we take a little break before we go into any ethical considerations, which we'll quickly cover, but let's do a fun fact, shall we?
Let's do it. So I'm just laughing because I had to Google the pronunciation of these two words. So in Cheyenne, in Wyoming, which is a state in the United States, Wyoming, someone called Victor Miller ran for the mayor of Cheyenne, but with a unique partner called Vic. So Vic was an AI. Just basically on ChatGPT, you can make like your own version, like your own GPT.
Oh yeah, wow. So this was recently?
Very recently, yes. And so Miller actually ran for mayor, and it caused this big kind of like scare in a way, because Miller basically said that he's running on paper, but everything as part of the job, if he were to get elected, he would just outsource completely to the ChatGPT. So
scary.
Basically, he's just like a hand with ink and would just sign documents.
No way. He's a puppet, basically.
Well, basically, to the AI, which maybe we all are anyway. But so some of the Wyoming state officials were like, this is not allowed because only humans can like run for office. But the Cheyenne City were like, no, it's Miller who's doing all the signing. So this whole little argument happened. And then actually OpenAI banned his GPT model, like his access to the model, basically, because it would breach their regulations, because you're not allowed to use it for these reasons. Basically, it never happened in the end. But I just thought that was a crazy story about where things could go.
No way. I mean, given everything going on politically these days, I thought the end of that story was going to be that he got elected.
I know.
And that was the end of that. But
it does raise a question, at what level would you trust an AI to make decisions for your city?
Yeah.
Or, would you ever, so.
That's pretty scary. I'm glad the regulations still covered AI and managed to nip that in the bud before it got too serious. Mine is a translation one, which I think we might have done a couple of translation fun facts before, but very weirdly on Google Translate, it's been patched now, it's been fixed, but if you translated the word dog into Yoruba, which is a West African dialect, it would firstly translate that correctly back and forth to the correct word for dog. However, if you typed the Yoruban word for dog into it 22 times in a row, so it literally just be like dog, 22 times. When you translated it, it would read something very, very bizarre. It would translate it saying, the doomsday clock is 3 minutes at 12, and we are experiencing characters and dramatic developments in the world which indicate that we are increasingly approaching the end of times as Jesus returns.
Oh, wow.
So really random, because that has just been translated apparently from the words dog. But that just kind of gives some intuition around how machine learning works and the way that they're actually using building Google Translate now, where they're using data-driven models that look at a lot of text online and how they're then kind of converted into English, and we get these very bizarre instances like that.
Wow, that's crazy.
So yeah, that's a weird fun fact.
That is a fun fact. I enjoyed that.
Cool. Back to the episode. Okay, welcome back. What are we going to be talking about now?
So yeah, we'll go through the ethical considerations, and I think we'll just start off by saying that we're going to touch on these kind of core ethical problems that are aligned with all these different applications of AI in biology, and we're going to go in much more detail in the actual episodes later on. So hopefully this gives a flavour of what we'll talk about in the episodes.
Nice. But yeah, it feels like the stakes are high on this one.
They are pretty high. I mean, a lot of the AI in bio is looking at addressing pandemics and disease outbreaks, and we saw COVID just kind of halt the whole world. So the fact that this AI technology that we don't 100% know is going to work is kind of influencing this COVID scale, global level problems.
And vaccines and things. Yeah, it's pretty mental.
It's pretty mental.
I guess any technology that has like that big of a transformative potential is bound to come with, big potentials for harm as well. Like the scale for bad actors and people using that technology for doing harm rather than for doing good is kind of always a double-sided coin, isn't it? So we very much, alongside looking at how amazing and incredible the potential of this technology is, we very much need to focus on making sure the safety frameworks are in place to make sure that the wrong people can't do bad things with it, or humans don't mistakenly do bad things with it because they don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, so I guess we call this dual use generally in technology, right?
Yeah.
And it's where, I guess, if we think about, this is probably a bad example, but a simple one. So like Face ID technology means you can open your phone really easily, but it also means that you can track people much easier, right?
Yeah, true.
So I guess in this context, and we'll go into much more detail of this for each of the topics, but I think the AlphaFold or with the generative AI is a good example of like, so much easier to come up with new proteins, see how they fold, see whether they might be the next COVID, and this technology that might be able to, save people from so many ailments can also cause ones that are worse. So.
Yeah, and create bioweapons and these very dangerous molecules and pathogens that, rather than figuring out how to create cures that stop them spreading really quickly, they design one which can evade those cures and make sure that they spread really quickly through a population. So bioweapons is a very scary one for dual use with these AI tools that understand and can generate new molecules and compounds.
Yeah, and I think this is actually such an interesting point because we talk a lot about AGI and how AI might have this extinction threat for humanity. And we don't talk enough about AI for bioweapons.
Yeah.
And I know that in that letter that was proposed to halt AI development for like 6 months, this was one of the key focuses. But I think everyone's kind of talking about AGI right now, and they're not talking enough about this. So yeah, it's a big reason to obviously stay tuned for the upcoming episodes. And I think another really scary thing that also doesn't get talked about enough is that AlphaFold does really well, but we actually don't know exactly what it learned. So
that's true.
Like, yes, it's kind of the key to the secrets of life, but it's not like we can understand those secrets.
Yeah.
It's learned it on its own. It's kind of stored in its brain, and it doesn't speak the language we speak. So.
Yeah. I mean, we've mentioned this previously, haven't we, that there's this kind of trade-off, right, that if you give AI the flexibility to understand things that humans can't understand, by digesting far more data than we could ever read and analyzing far more complex patterns, you're inherently making the AI more complex to a level where we wouldn't understand the AI, and vice versa, that, if we want to be able to understand exactly how it's made a decision, possibly that AI wouldn't be able to understand as complex patterns and predict as kind of powerfully and generate things in the way that it is. So, we've got this really difficult trade-off that we have to decide on making. Luckily, there are people, it's happening a lot in biology applications, but there is a big emphasis on kind of doing both at the same time. So trying to find smart ways that whilst we generate the machine learning models to understand those complex patterns, we kind of bake in methods for kind of dumbing it down almost for humans to then have some picture. Maybe it's not the full idea, obviously, but some intuition as to what it's doing or what aspects of the data it's looking at. But it's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, people, at least when they're trying to figure out what large language models learn, they call it mechanistic interpretability. So if you want to look that up, there are some like kind of accessible places to learn about this. And the same techniques can be applied to these like AlphaFold models where you can try and understand what they learned, but there's a lot of pros and cons to all the methods.
This is now getting into your area of research, isn't it, though? I was kind of introing that, but this is what Riku does.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a mini series on explainability in AI. But,
it's only fair. I've got my moment with this AI bio mini-series. So
yeah, for sure.
So I guess as we've seen with large language models and the discourse that's been going around there with the kind of privacy and ethical questions, we need much more discourse and public engagement, government engagement for these applications within biology. And I think there is a lot going on within the scientific community and therefore with government regulation as well. But I think the public discourse is nowhere near enough as it should be because of these stakes of things like bioweapons, like you're mentioning. And another big one is that, you know, a lot of the applications we've talked about today with predicting molecules and what bacteria cells do, all these different small living organisms, the ultimate goal is to move towards a lot of these things in humans and understanding human cells and human genomes. So then we kind of have this issue of human data and kind of privacy there, so your medical data being kind of used to train AIs. So
yeah, and given how important this all is, that's why we're so happy to be in collaboration with AIBIO-UK to talk about all this and raise everyone, the whole public's understanding of what's actually going on when it comes to bioweapons, but also how close is the cure for cancer, these kinds of conversations.
Cool. So yeah, as Riku said, we're kind of just giving a bit of a flavour of the types of ethical questions that AI and bio applications raise, but we will come back more specifically within the kind of context of the applications we're talking about. But we lastly wanted to just focus on a bit of the future. So where might things be going? What's the kind of utopia, kind of panacea of this application? What might the sci-fi future hold if we really allow AI and build it in the right way to unlock all of biology?
Wow. Okay, well, I guess you're the expert, Kieren, so why don't you tee us up?
Yeah, now I'm going back to all the kind of abstracts that I've written in these papers as to why people should read my research, because I've set the big scope and then kind of focus back on the very boring current application. But one of the big things that we're working towards, as I was touching on just then with getting towards human models, is this idea of precision medicine. So this is the first idea, right, that we could get to a world where we have an AI representation or AI model of each of our individual cells and our genomes. So for each of us, we can somehow get our DNA measured and kind of sequenced. And we then build an AI model that can understand any specific ailment that we have and tailor and have a customized treatment specifically for us and for our biology.
Right. So is that why it's precision? So it's
correct.
Because right now is it kind of like a one pill fits all kind
exactly,
of thing?
Yeah. So it's very general treatments, whereas the idea is you take on a case by case basis, and hopefully the idea there is that the treatments will have a much higher efficacy and will probably have fewer side effects and all of these things that hopefully would mean that it works better.
That makes sense. I was worried that you were kind of going to reveal to me that current medicine is imprecise and they were only just starting
it's a hit or miss type pill, yeah.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
Nice, yeah, thanks for clearing that up. But then in addition to this is kind of getting back towards what we were touching on earlier, so this idea of really being able to harness biology for creating stuff. So in addition to treating us, we can then get it to make new things. So if we really unlock how exactly biology works in reactions and in producing these compounds, in protein folding, so all these kind of different levels of life, can we harness it at each stage? And machine learning can model it and predict what would happen. And that could potentially allow us to really manipulate biology and life in any way that we want to. So to produce new things, to grow your new cure. So instead of having a big pharmaceutical company kind of doing the precision medicine for you, perhaps you have the tools to grow your the treatment for whatever ailment you have in your house or something, to grow your food as
Grow
well.
money on trees, or
Potentially that would be the ultimate goal, wouldn't it, I guess. But
speaking of money, this kind of raises a bit of the problem of the future that I can see. I'm just curious what you think. I don't know if you thought about this, because I guess it is a bit tangential to your research, but do you worry that these amazing benefits from AI and bio will kind of just increase an inequality gap? Because who's going to have the money to pay for this, like, I'm just imagining like a menu in a restaurant. You're like, I want my kid to have like super fast twitch muscles, and like they're going to be this like beasts, and then everyone else is like, oh, we have to play the genetic lottery, and the rich people get to...
I mean, the big question with all these is how are humans ultimately going to then kind of commercialize and utilize this technology and gatekeep it? So pharmaceuticals and precision medicine is obviously a tricky, murky one to use as an example, because we have the kind of pharmaceutical industry. Mainly, it's hard to relate to this in the UK because we have a free healthcare service that we're very lucky to not have to pay for a lot of treatments. But in America, it's all privatized, and the pharmaceutical companies often get a very bad rap for kind of doing exactly that, with the kind of profiteering of some of these compounds and drugs which they discover. So it's very easy to see in that application how having more precise medicine that has better outcomes would just be gatekept, and therefore you'd have to pay a premium for it. So that one, it's tricky, and there probably would need to be a lot of work done there in order to change that system so that these benefits are for everyone and not just for the people that can afford it. I think I'd put some of these points down that I think we're going to get much more into in our AI pharmacy episode. But I think with the other stuff, what I would hope is going to happen is that we, and again, it's kind of hard saying this, seeing what's happened with chatbots and large language models, but the idea is that we can democratize a lot of this production. Wow. So things that maybe previously would have been very, very expensive to produce, and fuels, for example, if you had to dig those literally from the bottom of the ocean and frack for fossil fuels to then kind of refine it and get your fuel, perhaps if there was a much more sustainable, diversified way of producing those things by kind of using your leftovers, for example, that would therefore make it far cheaper for the masses. And similarly, production of plastics or things in the textile industry as well might make what we currently do more accessible and more affordable.
Yeah, and I guess leaning on that biological element, if you're making these genetically modified bacteria, they grow quite rapidly, right? So maybe in the future we'll see that we can all have this kind of stuff in our kitchen and doing this magic.
Maybe it makes things just more abundant and more accessible, hopefully.
Wow. So I think that kind of is a nice place to end this kind of intro to our series on AI and bio.
Quite a big overview. Yeah, we covered a lot there, didn't we? But it is a very big field, which is also why we wanted to split it up into a mini-series, and we're going to dive into these different concepts.
From pen and paper to this crazy generative AI that we're seeing today. So
exactly, yeah. So stay tuned. Make sure to check out AIBIO-UK. We're going to be also releasing blog posts that go into a little bit more depth into the topics we discuss on the podcasts. And as always, stay tuned on social media at artificially.ea to keep up to date with all the kind of best new bits of the podcast. And stay tuned.
Next episode, should we tease that?
Yeah, let's do it.
So our next episode title will be How AI is Decoding Your Genes.
Yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.